Both the President and Mrs. Roosevelt would talk a lot about what went on. He would say, every time one gives in to Hitler.
Hitler's death has long been accepted as a closed chapter in history. But what if the truth was never that simple? For decades, whispers and wild claims circulated, from secret submarine escapes to hidden bunkers in South America, casting doubt on the official story. What makes these rumors more unsettling is that one persistent FBI agent spent nearly 40 years chasing down every lead, documenting a trail far stranger than fiction. Imagine a manhunt so vast that it stretched across continents, fueled by cryptic tips and shadowy informants, yet yielding more questions than answers. The recently released FBI notes reveal not only the obsession with finding Hitler, but also the tangled web of Nazi fugitives who slipped into the shadows. This is the haunting story of a decades-long pursuit that blurs the line between myth and chilling possibility. The death doubts begin. When the war in Europe came to a close, newspapers everywhere heralded Adolf Hitler's death with relief and finality. The Allied victory celebrations echoed around the globe, and for many, the chapter on the Nazi dictator was closed. But the official story left a critical detail out. There was no physical body to confirm Hitler's demise. This glaring absence quickly gave rise to suspicion and doubt, leaving the world with unanswered questions about the true fate of one of history's most feared men. Hitler's last days were spent deep inside an underground bunker beneath the ruins of Berlin. Soviet forces closed in from every direction, while above ground, the Nazi government crumbled into chaos. On April 30th, 1945, in a small room below the shattered chancellery, Hitler and Eva Braun reportedly took their own lives. Their bodies were carried outside, laid in a shallow grave, doused with fuel, and set aflame as bombs and shells exploded nearby. The Soviets were the first to reach the site, seizing control of whatever remained. But their reports about the cause of death and the condition of the bodies were inconsistent. Some witnesses said Hitler died from a gunshot, others pointed to poison, and still others hinted that the corpse was a double or a decoy. These contradictions made it impossible for Western allies to verify any of the claims firsthand. At the center of this uncertainty was Joseph Stalin, who masterfully weaponized the confusion. In June of 1945, his field marshal boldly told the press that Soviet troops had not found Hitler. At subsequent meetings with Western leaders, Stalin suggested the dictator might be hiding in distant locales like Spain or Argentina, but offered no proof. His calculated ambiguity sowed the seeds of conspiracy that would capture the public imagination. Almost immediately, the idea that Hitler had escaped became a global sensation. Polls from that summer showed that about 2/3 of Americans believed he was still alive somewhere. 2 years later, a British intelligence officer named Hugh Trevor Roper published a detailed account of Hitler's final days, yet nearly half of Americans still expressed doubt about the dictator's death. For millions, the nightmare lingered. This persistent belief was driven in part by the lack of concrete evidence and the deep trauma caused by the war. People wanted closure, but craved certainty. The thought that Hitler might be on the run fueled endless rumors and occasional sightings, snippets of information that were difficult to verify but impossible to ignore. Within the halls of power in Washington, one man was determined not to let that story go unexamined. J. Edgar Hoover, longtime head of the FBI, was obsessed with rooting out threats before they could grow. To him, the speculation about Hitler's escape wasn't merely academic. It was a live security risk that demanded attention. Hoover understood that if there was even a sliver of truth to the rumors, the consequences could be dire. The possibility of Hitler or his closest followers escaping to hostile or sympathetic territories meant the potential for renewed extremist threats. The FBI was ordered to pursue every lead and log every tip. As the world celebrated victory, the seeds of doubt took root and flourished, leaving behind a shadow that would haunt investigators for decades to come. The question of whether Hitler was truly dead became not just a matter of history, but the beginning of an obsessive, global hunt led by Hoover himself. Hoover's relentless hunt. J. Edgar Hoover was no stranger to complex investigations. By 1945, he had already spent years building the FBI into a force capable of tackling gangsters, spies, and subversive elements inside the United States. To Hoover, the rumors about Hitler's fate were a puzzle that couldn't be ignored, especially with reports of sightings and whispers about underground operations multiplying across the globe. Deciding to treat Hitler's death as an open case, Hoover officially assigned the FBI to investigate. Field offices were told to gather and scrutinize any information suggesting the dictator might still be alive. This meant funneling endless rumors, suspicions, and tips through headquarters, most of which turned out to be vague, unsubstantiated, or patently false. The sheer volume of information overwhelmed agents. Common reports ranged from sightings of elderly men resembling Hitler in remote towns to stories circulating among German expatriates. Each lead demanded careful vetting, but often ended with a familiar refrain: unable to confirm. Despite the dead ends, no tip was dismissed outright. Hoover's stance was unmistakable: the impossibility of overlooking the possible threats, especially with such high stakes. Moreover, the Bureau's participation was a clear signal that the hunt had gone from being just a rumor to an official intelligence operation. The FBI was spending a lot of money and manpower on the investigation of possible escape routes, safe places, and communication networks linked to people friendly to Nazis. The search for Hitler went all around the world, not just restricted to Europe. The intelligence agencies in different parts of the world were scouring for any evidence that could either verify or deny the death of the dictator. The FBI's task was to coordinate with other agencies, and this included passing on verified leads, thus highlighting the concern about the dictator's fate on a global scale. Agents working behind the scenes were gradually filing detailed case files that were becoming more and more complex with the passing of each year, documenting every story. This fixation was not only on Hitler, but also on his nearest and dearest, as well as the government officials who might have been involved in either helping him escape or keeping him hidden. The FBI's candid internal stance illustrated the difficulty in deciding between urgency and uncertainty. While at the same time, no direct evidence had been uncovered, the likelihood could not be ruled out. In fact, Hoover was aware that his action of not pursuing a credible lead might bring him from bad to worse in history. This tireless pursuit kept the case alive for many years, as new intelligence and anonymous sources kept the fire of interest burning. The investigation of Hitler was no longer a straightforward examination. It turned into a long feud with doubt and deceit. Amid this sea of information, one of the most intriguing leads emerged thousands of miles from Berlin in the city of Los Angeles: the California submarine tip. In September of 1945, the FBI field office in Los Angeles received a report that stood out among the noise. It detailed an astonishing claim. Hitler had escaped Berlin aboard a German submarine and was secreted away to Argentina. The memo bore a blunt all-caps subject line, "Hitler Hideout," immediately signaling the gravity the Bureau assigned to the tip. The source of the claim was a man who had approached a reporter at a restaurant near Hollywood and Vine. According to the report, this informant was involved in a clandestine effort to protect Hitler in the final days of the war. He described coordinating with high-ranking Argentine officials to receive Hitler and his entourage, transporting them from a remote beach toward a hidden ranch in the Andes Mountains. Details in the report traced the journey carefully. 2 German submarines arriving off the Argentine coastline weeks after the fall of Berlin. The first scouting the shoreline under night cover, and the second delivering the passengers, Hitler, doctors, aides, and 2 women. Small boats ferried them from the submerged vessels to a quiet beach, where local contacts awaited transport inland. The informant insisted he was one of 4 men who helped escort Hitler to safety, guiding the group by horseback for an entire day into a guarded ranch. He named surrounding towns and provided descriptions that gave the story a veneer of plausibility, mentioning friendly German families supporting the hideout. According to him, the man himself, Hitler no longer had the familiar mustache, but suffered chronic health issues like asthma and stomach ulcers. A conspicuous scar on his face was cited as further evidence. Beyond one ranch, the files included another letter placing Hitler in an underground bunker hundreds of miles away, concealed behind a secret light-sensitive door. The FBI took the report seriously, despite their caution. They investigated the claimed locations, sought corroboration from immigration records and police files, and passed the intelligence to military contacts. Still, no concrete evidence emerged, and the primary source vanished before agents could re-interview him. This tip also led agents into a sprawling network of wealthy Nazi sympathizers. The files named a German Argentine woman who had maintained close ties with Nazi officials and ran an exclusive spa rumored to be a refuge for Nazi fugitives, complete with facilities reserved for Hitler himself. The region showed documented pro-Nazi sentiment, secret cells, and safe houses. Though the submarine escape tale has never been verified, it crystallized the FBI's challenge, sorting truth from myth in a world still haunted by shadows of war. The hunt for Hitler was mired in elusive leads and whispered threats, with every tip pulling investigators deeper into a complex web of secrecy. From these murky origins, the search grew broader and far more tangled, as agents pursued not only Hitler, but the many who had once stood in his shadow. Nazi networks in Argentina. Beyond the submarine tip, FBI files delve into a shadowy world of pro-Nazi sympathizers and hidden communities deep within Argentina. This country wasn't just a random speculation, it became a known sanctuary where former Nazis found refuge, protected by locals sympathetic to their cause. The Bureau gathered intelligence revealing secret safe houses, organized underground cells, and influential individuals who quietly supported Nazi fugitives long after the war ended. One figure who emerges repeatedly in the reports is a wealthy German-Argentine woman identified as Mrs. Ilkorn. She ran a luxurious spa hotel in a mountain town in Córdoba province, a place noted for its strong Nazi connections. According to the FBI, Mrs. Ilkorn boasted about giving substantial financial aid to the Nazi Party, particularly to propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels. Her resort was more than a business. It was allegedly intended as a future refuge for Hitler himself. Documents describe her hotel, the Eden Hotel, as equipped with private radio towers, large dining halls, and even a room reserved exclusively for Hitler. The surrounding area was described as a hub of covert activities, where German labor leaders received instructions to prepare safe houses for war criminals seeking shelter. The FBI's files connect this region to a broader network of loyalty and protection for Nazi officials after their regime's fall. Other known war criminals reportedly frequented this area, blending into a landscape that provided both anonymity and community. Though the idea of Hitler himself living comfortably at a ranch in Argentina may sound extraordinary, these reports underscore that many high-ranking Nazis did find sanctuary in South America. The FBI took these leads seriously, confirming the existence of extensive pro-Nazi networks and financial systems operating beneath the surface of Argentine society. The complexity of the geographical coverage, the support provided by the local population, and the finances made the area a difficult one for the enforcement of international law. The regions that international ordinance or law enforcement characterized as over-occupied by the remnants of the Third Reich were not willing to give up easily, and this resulted in the dark aftershock of the war lingering even in the late 1940s. Agents of the FBI were usually on the quest to track down informants and persons of interest in the U.S., more often than not returning to the same spots where such hints had first popped up. The eavesdropping strategy comprised watching eateries and rendezvous in Los Angeles, and they hoped the unidentified informer who broke the submarine story might again appear. However, many pointers disappeared as quickly as they showed up, thus leaving the agents to run after phantoms, plus rumors that were enveloped in fear and secrecy. The network of Nazi sympathizers in Argentina was huge, and it had the effect of causing death-blow anxieties to be revived continuously. The FBI believed that even if Hitler was no longer present there physically, the support system for his hiding and that of his adherents was there, and it was active. This acknowledgement thus opened up the hunt for broader intents and purposes and demonstrated how complicated and rooted the Nazi diaspora had become. The tension-filled mixture of money, power, and loyalty in Argentina was a signal that the search for Hitler had just been a small part of a more extensive struggle against a still active international network that was not ready to give up and was, in fact, still resisting justice. But as the FBI dug deeper and stretched its reach, the reality became clear. Many leads would simply vanish, melting away like mist before dawn. The melting trail. Each promising lead on Hitler's whereabouts seemed to slip through the fingers of investigators like water. The FBI's pursuit grew increasingly difficult amid the vast, shadowy world of post-war fugitives and misinformation. Surveillance attempts often ended in frustration as suspects disappeared or intelligence failed to coalesce into concrete proof. The scarcity of solid evidence turned the search into a relentless and often thankless endeavor. Agents tirelessly tracked names, scanned passenger lists, and monitored border crossings worldwide, but the trail frequently went cold. The complex network of aliases, forged documents, and loyal protectors made distinguishing fact from fiction a constant challenge. Even well-placed informants sometimes turned out unreliable, leaving personnel to question which stories were truth and which were deception. Naval intelligence records showed that German submarines did surrender in places like Mar del Plata, Argentina, but there was never any credible sign that Hitler or his close circle were among the passengers. Still, the FBI couldn't dismiss claims outright. One report noted that a key informant claimed to have been paid a significant sum, later reported as $15,000, to assist in an escape operation, and that guilt had driven him to consider telling the full truth. By the late 1940s, the FBI's files swelled with countless tales as dramatic as the submarine story itself, many proving false upon investigation. Agents repeatedly encountered frightened witnesses, deliberate hoaxers, and people with just enough knowledge of Nazi movements to lend false credibility to rumors. The tireless chase blurred the lines between espionage, disinformation, and genuine intelligence gathering. As the years passed, the focus gradually shifted from Hitler himself to the many former Nazi officials and soldiers who had successfully vanished into new lives around the world. Endless new cases opened based on sightings, suspicions, or documents showing suspicious immigration records. The sprawling task of tracking these individuals required coordination across military, justice, and intelligence agencies. The unending flow of leads and dead ends created a haunting atmosphere, emphasizing just how elusive justice could be when faced with such a network of skilled fugitives. The fog of war extended long after the battles ended, with men slipping away into obscurity or reinventing themselves in foreign lands. The trail melted not only because of active evasion, but also due to the worldwide scale of the pursuit. Few locations were truly safe havens, yet fugitives' persistence wore down law enforcement's resources and resolve. It was a grinding battle between determination and disappearance. While the search for Hitler became increasingly fraught with uncertainty, the quest uncovered a wider story, a saga of forgotten soldiers and hidden pasts that would dominate the decades to come. The chase for one man had evolved into a decades-long hunt for many, each with secrets worth uncovering yet stubbornly kept from the light, from Hitler to followers. As the elusive hunt for Hitler gradually lost momentum, the FBI's attention shifted toward a broader target: the many Nazi officers and collaborators who had slipped through the cracks after the war. These men, though less notorious, represented a pervasive threat, having hidden their pasts and assimilated into societies around the globe. The Bureau's mission expanded beyond a single dictator to track a growing web of fugitives living under assumed identities, many eager to evade justice. Military courts in the late 1940s and 1950s prosecuted some senior Nazis, but many others disappeared into exile, often settling in South America, the Middle East, or even within the United States. Over time, it became apparent that some had entered the U.S. quietly, using false documents or concealing their affiliations, slipping unnoticed into communities and comfortable lives. This posed new challenges for law enforcement agencies tasked with identifying and removing them. The FBI became a central player in this effort, often working alongside military intelligence, the Justice Department, and later specialized governmental units. They provided background investigations, conducted covert surveillance, and carried out interviews to uncover who these men truly were. Each newly uncovered identity led to a complex web of legal and political difficulties around extradition, citizenship, and prosecution. This extended pursuit reflected the evolving nature of post-war justice, where the scale of deception and cover-up forced agencies to adapt. The men once tied tightly to Hitler's regime became hidden figures in a global game of cat and mouse, complicating efforts to close the book on the crimes of the era. The FBI's long-term investigations kept this shadowed history alive in the halls of power for decades. The Bureau's shifting strategies reached their peak in the 1970s when the Office of Special Investigations was established, a unit whose sole focus was devoted to the pursuit of war criminals who were Nazis and had escaped into the world. The office had a mandate to find, prosecute, and, when legally permissible, denaturalize or deport the individuals involved in the slaying of innocents during world wars. They opened hundreds of cases over the years and deported over 100 offenders. However, the informal structure that had long been in place before the formal one was made up of agents whose earlier files were the ones with vital intelligence and the very materials that would sustain decades of prosecutions. These files were a great help to the new unit as they made it more efficient and helped it discover the lasting impact of the initial hunt. One of the numerous cases that came to the FBI was a very remarkable story. A young soldier turned fugitive whose decades-long avoidance illustrated the greater issue that the investigators had to face. His disappearing act was a metaphor for the survival of unsolved post-war mysteries and the intricate human realities behind the large narratives of history. It was the search that became broader and deeper, which then revealed the real story that went beyond Hitler, affecting a multitude of people and altering the course of global justice in unforeseen ways. Yet, even as agents pursued the many shadows cast by the Third Reich, one man's extraordinary tale would stand out as America's longest Nazi manhunt, marked by secrecy, fear, and ultimately, unexpected resolution. The case of Georg Gartner. Among the more unusual FBI files was the case of Georg Gartner, a former soldier in the German Afrika Korps, a unit infamous for its brutal campaigns during the war. Captured in North Africa by British forces, Gartner was transferred into American custody and held as a prisoner of war. Like many German captives, he was moved between camps scattered across the United States, including one near Deming, New Mexico. In the waning months of 1945, with the war over and camp security relaxed, Gartner found an opportunity for escape. At 24 years old, apprehensive about returning to his native region, which had fallen under Soviet control, he chose to risk life as a fugitive in foreign lands rather than face imprisonment or worse. One night, studying the routines of his captors, he slipped under the perimeter fence and vanished into the vast rail networks of the American Southwest. Most escapees were quickly recaptured, but Gartner was different. His disappearance triggered a nationwide manhunt. The FBI issued wanted posters, and his name lingered for decades on fugitive lists, yet he remained free, living a life shrouded in secrecy and constant vigilance. He adopted a new name, Dennis F.W., and moved between jobs and states to stay one step ahead of discovery. Over the years, Gartner worked as a farmhand, draftsman, construction laborer, and even a ski instructor in California. Later, he became a tennis coach in Colorado, quietly building a life with no arrests or violent incidents to his name. Despite the cooling interest from authorities in the 1960s, he lived with the fear that every knock at the door could bring agents. In the 1960s, he married an American woman, Jean, raising her children and establishing a stable home life. Though friends knew him as a quiet man with a German accent, only Jean sensed the weight of his concealed past. Their marriage suffered strains, particularly when Gartner briefly returned to Germany, unwilling to fully disclose his history to his wife. It wasn't until the early 1980s that Gartner confided in historian Arnold Kramer, an expert on German prisoners of war in America. Revealing his true identity and story, the The two collaborated on a book that eventually earned Gartner the nickname Hitler's Last Soldier in America. His story was no longer hidden in FBI files, but brought into the public eye. In an astonishing moment in September 1985, Gartner appeared on live television in New York, voluntarily admitting to being the long-missing prisoner who escaped from Deming decades earlier. Immigration officials awaited him in the studio to begin formal proceedings. Yet, because Gartner had escaped to avoid persecution and had lived peacefully, the government ultimately chose not to charge him and allowed his continued residence, leading to eventual U.S. citizenship. Gartner's story stands as a poignant reminder that the legacies of war extend far beyond battles and headlines, carrying into lives transformed by fear, survival, and the complex pursuit of justice. The pursuit of one missing fugitive evolved into a tale that reflected an era's haunted past and inspired renewed efforts that would ripple through the decades ahead. Declassification and legacy. Decades after the war ended, countless FBI files about Hitler and his followers gathered dust in sealed government archives. These documents were largely forgotten, hidden behind layers of classification and bureaucracy. For most people, what transpired in those files, the tips, investigations, rumors, and dead ends, remained inaccessible, locked away from public view and academic scrutiny. The stories of suspicion and pursuit were relegated to obscurity alongside countless other Cold War mysteries. That changed in the late 1990s when Congress passed the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. This legislation mandated that federal agencies, including the FBI, the CIA, and Army intelligence, review their Nazi-era documents and release everything related to war crimes or Nazi suspects unless there was a compelling national security reason to withhold it. The move marked a historic shift toward transparency and accountability regarding one of the darkest chapters in modern history. A special team called the Interagency Working Group was established to oversee this massive process. Over more than a decade, they screened more than 100 million pages, eventually declassifying more than 8 million pages of records, including hundreds of thousands from the FBI alone. This vast trove revealed not just information on camps and trials, but also the tangled side stories of intelligence operations, Cold War bargains with former Nazis, and the many rumors that Hitler might have survived. Among these released records were the long-hidden FBI notes that charted the Bureau's decades-long obsession with Hitler's fate. Now available to the public, these files offer a raw, unfiltered glimpse into a world of shadowy informants, elusive sightings, and the constant tension between fact and fiction. They reveal how the FBI meticulously documented every whisper and claim, even those that ultimately proved false, reflecting the persistent anxiety and unresolved questions that lingered for decades. The FBI also created an online reading room called The Vault, where anyone can access these files from home. Included among them is a file simply labeled Hitler, detailing investigations extending from the early 1930s into the late 1940s. This file concentrates particularly on the chaotic period immediately following Germany's surrender when fears of Hitler's escape were at their height. For the first time, ordinary people can examine the very memos, reports, and analyses once reserved for covert investigators. Nonetheless, while these papers open what had been hidden for decades, they also bring up again the same old questions that were never resolved. What caused the rumors about Hitler's still living to last for such a long time? What truth is hidden under the pile of disinformation, misinformation, and Cold War intrigue? The historical opinion has it that Hitler died in his Berlin bunker. Nonetheless, the FBI's documents suggest the existence of a doubt that is not willing to vanish completely. These files signify a very important lesson about vigilance and the intricacy of justice beyond the myth and mystery. The search for Hitler turned out to be not only a specific undertaking, but also an extensive mission that included tracking and punishing people who did terrible things but managed to change their identities and live undetected. It shows the extreme difficulties that investigators had to face in their attempts to ensure justice during a period characterized by worldwide turmoil and lying. What has been revealed, in addition, draws our attention to the truth's vulnerability during wars. Histories of the most certain events may still be remarked with doubts. Storytellers may vie for their own versions, and human nature may just want to believe that there are different endings. While millions of people considered the idea that evil might still be amongst us, the FBI's notes portray the battle of emotions between fear, hope, and the unyielding request for closure. The archives of the newly declassified ones are not merely historical documents, but are also a witness to an era's painful scars that still remain, the power of memory, and the never-ending search for the truth of when and how the world thought Hitler had vanished forever. The decades-long FBI hunt for Hitler shows how history's shadows can stretch far beyond the battlefield. It's a story of relentless pursuit, hidden truths, and the complicated realities behind official accounts. If you found this journey through history's mysteries compelling, please like the video and subscribe for more deep dives into the stories that shape our world.